Hello, everybody, and welcome once again to the Tea Party is Dead podcast. I am your host, Jim, and today we have two very special guests joining us today. Chris Littleton is the co-founder of Ohio Revolution and was also a member of the ballot committee for the Ohio Freedom Healthcare Amendment, which created a constitutional amendment in Ohio to kill Obamacare at the state level. Also joining us will be David Adams. He is the director of Kentucky Knows Best PAC and is the former campaign manager to U.S. Senator Rand Paul. Gentlemen, how are you doing today?
Really good, Jim.
Terrific, Jim. Great to be with you.
All right, so for the people that don't live in Ohio, can you explain exactly what the purpose of the Freedom Healthcare Amendment is?
Yeah, so at the time of its creation, basically what we wanted to do was give ourselves the strongest state-based foundation for one, there's kind of two parts to this. One was a legal challenge to the federal health care bill that Obama and friends passed in 2010. And part two was state-based protection against anything like Romneycare that would come down from whether it be the current governor or any other governor and legislature to decide to do some kind of state-based mandated system. So those were the intents at the beginning, was to make mandated health care of any kind extremely difficult from the federal level and then actually illegal from the state level. And that's what we set out to do at the onset.
Okay, now this has succeeded, fortunately, and there is now an amendment in the state constitution to pretty much ban Obamacare from the state of Ohio. But even though this happened, if you do some reading, it with what's going on in the state of Ohio, there seems to be a disconnect because there are some insurance exchanges that seem to still be forming. Can you explain to me why you think there's a disconnect?
Yeah, well, so this comes down to, how a court rules and how they don't rule, and I think as we've all come to, accept, and not in a good way, that, courts will do things that are definitely unconstitutional. So what we all believe was a very bad ruling came down from the U.S. Supreme Court. And certainly wasn't anything that helped our cause. Now, our case was not necessarily, our legal foundation, so to speak, was not necessarily built on the idea that the Commerce Clause was the only means to sort of challenge the unconstitutionality of this. So this is going to be done in multiple phases, and I apologize in advance for it kind of being an extended answer. But one of the first phases is we're probably going to have to even wait until, it could even be as late as 2014 to have standing for an individual to challenge this based on the legal protection they're given by the Ohio Healthcare Freedom Amendment. So what does that mean for us in real terms? It means that we do not think the fight is over for the federal mandate. And one of the ways that we would like to have it heard is that, okay, one, the state has taken care of this issue. We have a statement on this issue. We have protection on this issue, and that was something we intended. But this person is given some pretty interesting standing because they do have the state to fall back on. And so what we're hoping is to go before the federal government at some point and actually say, listen, you have no right to this person's liberty and property. They have state-based protections against this kind of intervention. As an individual, looking at, funny enough, Fourth Amendment, 14th Amendment, a couple other directions, all independent of the Commerce Clause, we actually want to have an independent case heard based on a case that's driven by individual rights, with state-based protection being sort of the bulwark of the case that we would base this on. But as you know, and probably everybody knows, the mandate hasn't actually kicked in yet. And so we're all going to have to sort of wait for that moment where a person would then receive standing. And I think you're probably going to see this happen around the country as well. Someone that you may be interested in talking to in the future is the attorney who wrote this, which is Maurice Thompson from the 1851 Center for Constitutional Law. He's written extensively on this and certainly has, a great number of things that we want to challenge based on the amendment that was passed in an individual standing with that regards. So that's a legal pathway, but that is certainly a conflict with what we believe the interpretation should be and how this law is going to affect Ohioans. So that's the legal part. Part two, and this has a lot more substance to it, because that's all theoretical. We hope we can move forward. We still want to challenge this, but it's in the future. In the real moment, here's something that's very fascinating. The state-based exchanges you were alluding to, which the health care bill basically says that every state has to create a health care exchange or health insurance exchange either on their own or the federal government's going to do it. So based on the reading of the Ohio Healthcare Freedom Amendment, Ohio would be prohibited from using any money, resources, management, anything that has to do with state and local dollars or oversight to run a state-based healthcare exchange, because it would be in direct conflict with the Ohio Healthcare Freedom Amendment. In short term, if the federal government wants to do something on their own and set up a federal exchange, Ohioans can get dumped into that. There's not too much we can say about that because our law only applies to the state of Ohio. But if the state of Ohio chooses to implement that, they're in direct violation of the Ohio Constitution, and we have expressed to the current administration that we are happy to engage into a lawsuit challenging that, and the Attorney General of the state is also constitutionally obligated to take our side because it is in direct violation of the Ohio Constitution. So we think that's one of the reasons why we have not seen a state-based exchange set up in the state of Ohio. And then part two, one of the things we don't want to see happen, and the U.S. Supreme Court actually ruled in our favor on this one, was that it was left up to states, largely because it was an unfunded mandate, that they did not have to expand Medicaid, because ultimately the way that the Medicaid laws are written is that the states have control over what they do, what they spend, and the criteria for Medicare. So if we can hold strong on that, we're keeping the federal government out. You take those two things into the account. The one other sort of really cool and very fascinating thing a lot of people don't know about is the actual fine that hits business, the way that the health care bill was written, the federal health care bill was written, the fine that hits business does not kick in for that company if they're not meeting federal criteria for offering of insurance, unless the person is put, onto a state-based system. So if we don't want to have these employer-based fines and these employer-based mandates in Ohio, the best thing we can do is not create a state-based exchange. And because we have in law now in our Constitution, it is illegal for us to create a state-based exchange. We have a great motive for our citizens, individuals, and private business owners to oppose this with every breath that they have, so they can oppose these mandates and these fines. And then we also have the legal ability to do it. And so I think we're in a very good position, much better than other states, because we have amended our Constitution, and more than that, we amended it by citizens' initiative, which means that it wasn't even passed by a legislature. We went and got signatures for this, placed it on the ballot, and people voted on this, which is about the strongest statement that a state can make on this issue. And we feel the strongest language that's out there in any kind of mandate, anti-mandate amendment that any state has done in the country. So I think that's the kind of big three that are this thing addressed, and also some of the conflicts that you alluded to.
So, David, since Kentucky doesn't have the luxury of ballot initiatives and changing the state constitution like Ohio does, what exactly are you doing to try and solve this problem?
Well, there are a couple of steps. The first step is to kill Obamacare, and we may not succeed at that, but what I'm focusing on is the second step, which is fostering an environment for free market health care to strive in Kentucky. Interestingly, the Obamacare bill itself makes provision for or creates an exemption for religious publications or religious health sharing organizations. And this, in my view, can be capitalized upon using Kentucky law and the Kentucky Constitution to create a true free market healthcare system in the state of Kentucky. And that's something, when we do it, we can share with other states.
Gotcha. It's like we keep on talking about this financial fiscal cliff that everybody's talking about on the federal level, but I think it's very important that people understand that there is a big fiscal cliff at the state level as well. I was hoping that maybe you could shed some light and talk about your state a little bit. I know it has some budget issues for years, but how much would an Obamacare compound your state's problems if it is fully implemented?
It literally bankrupts us in 2015. It'll happen very, very quickly. And the main reason for that is that we've spent the last 15 years or so dramatically underfunding our public employee pension system. So we're some $40 billion in arrears. I mean, it sounds totally absurd. I mean, we're a small, poor state with a $10 billion a year state budget, and we have absolutely destroyed ourselves by taking the money that was supposed to go into public employee pensions and just blowing it on other things. So the chickens are coming home to roost on that. Under normal circumstances, within 2 to 3 years, the Obamacare health insurance exchange becomes the state's total responsibility in 2015, as well as the costs of expanding Medicaid, which we can't afford any of that. So I think that accelerates our process a little bit. By 2015, Kentucky and perhaps probably Illinois first, but Kentucky and Illinois and maybe a handful of other states will seriously be looking at being unable to pay their bills.
So, Chris, I'm going to throw the next question to you first. I did discover recently that there have been some Republican congressmen who are actually now voting to fund Obamacare. I was it's insane, isn't it?
Oh, I haven't read that yet. Who is it? I haven't even read it yet.
No, well, I could send it to you. There's a congressman in Virginia, at least one, and there's got to be other ones, and that's a swing state.
Right.
I was just wondering what your thoughts were of those Republicans that are casting votes to fund Obamacare.
It's obviously completely inappropriate. But I think that's what's come to, and this is a whole separate conversation, it's slightly off topic, but, well, maybe it's on topic. D.C. has become largely in the political process, and I would even argue that it's local, even state-based legislators and governors, that largely the decision-making has been driven by nothing but re-election. And so they will do whatever they can do and get away with that keeps them inoculated from a challenge or keeps money flowing into a campaign. So that's special interests of all different kinds. It doesn't matter who you are, it's what type of special interest. There's very few exceptions to that rule. The special interests don't engage with large amounts and large dollar levels. So these guys are influenced by a very small number of people, and it's all geared to, are these people and this special interest trying to help me get back in office or not? As long as they feel safe that a supporter or constituent or special interest is going to help them stay in office and that vote is not harsh enough to get them thrown out of office, they'll do it. There is no set of principles that guide them. There is no sense of right or wrong. There is no, appropriateness of law driven by anything other than, is this going to hurt me or help me politically? And so if they feel that it's a safe enough vote for them, they're going to do it. It's the history of politics.
What about you, David?
It's horrible, but it's been so bad for so long that it's hard to even bat an eyelash at the lack of spine in the Republican Party at the very highest levels. So yeah, disappointed, same as always. Not a bit surprised.
Gotcha. Well, if I'm not mistaken, what I've been reading is that Kentucky's Governor Steve Beshear has the second highest, and please correct me if I'm wrong, funds set aside to fund Obamacare. There's a rumor going around that says that one of the reasons why he's doing this is because if President Obama gets elected to a second term, that he may be appointed to some position somewhere in D.C. or even on his cabinet. Have you heard of any rumors regarding that?
It's hilarious. That's really, I try to stay pretty well plugged into the rumor mill. I haven't heard that one. That's a great rumor that I'll probably be spreading here pretty soon to see what bounces back. No, that's an interesting one. The rumor, the latest rumor that actually just got put to bed today was that Beshear may be looking to run against Senator McConnell in 2016. 2014. And so he said that that's not the case. Boy, it would be funny to think of him going to Washington, D.C. anyway. But with regard to the excessive state funding, actually it's their federal grant dollars coming from Washington, D.C. into the states to set up the Obamacare health insurance exchanges. As that has happened, Kentucky has been a prodigious accumulator of those grant funds, and I think we may have dropped to third, but we're right at the, if we're not third, we're second. So right at the very, very top, and then on a per capita basis, we're number one in the country.
Gotcha. Chris, the next question is going to go to you again. Do you believe that if Mitt Romney gets elected to be president, that he will grant a 50-state waiver to repeal Obamacare?
Well, no. I guess then there's two parts to that. The short answer is no. The longer answer is this. There's been all this talk about repealing Obamacare in its entirety. I think there's absolutely zero chance that happens for a couple reasons. One is the process for it to occur appropriately would be to take it back before the legislature, specifically the Senate. They would have to have 60 votes to reach cloture to even put it on the floor, then a simple majority to vote on it after that. Well, there's not enough votes in the U.S. Senate, and there's not going to be enough votes in the U.S. Senate. So if you were to properly repeal the whole thing as it should be done, it's just not going to happen. Just there's no math for it at this point, and that's just a hard, simple fact that sort of you can't argue at this point. So now we're talking about what would you do given that you can't repeal the whole thing. One of the potentials is Romney does this executive order thing and says, okay, well, the states are going to get out of these. Now, I and a lot of other people don't want to see that happen because we think that's continued abuse of the executive branch and don't want to see the president, sort of riding roughshod over the legislature, even if the rule is absolutely deplorable and we hate it and work against it. We still don't want to see executives taking advantage of situations like that because it leads to an unbelievable precedent and a very, very slippery slope, of which we now have. I think Obama has approaching 200 executive orders, and Bush before him had something near 500 executive orders, two of the highest in American history for use of the executive branch. So I don't want to see it happen that way. Will he? Don't know. Very hard to say. I still think unlikely. So then option 3 is, well, what could they repeal if they had a number of people or he wanted to do something? I think it's far more likely, and Reason.com has actually written pretty extensively on this if you want to do some research, that they're going to pick and choose components that are popular with people that they will leave, and then ones that are not so popular with people that they'll try to take away. Again, you still have that obstacle that is the numbers don't work within Congress. And I think that largely, unless this thing is challenged from a state by individuals through the appropriate process, I think this health care bill is here to stay for a long time, unless states actually fight against it. So no, I have no confidence in D.C. to fix this situation in any way, shape, or form. Zero.
I think he's been very clear all along, with some bouncing around his on-the-record statements when he was looking straight, in somebody's eye or straight in the camera. What he was saying was that he likes everything about Obamacare, except for the tax increases. So I can't imagine where the money would come from for Romneycare. In Romneycare in Massachusetts, the exorbitant amount of funding that created that came from the federal government. They got some kind of a weird Medicaid waiver that granted them additional funds from the other 49 states, a lot of additional funds to make Romneycare quote unquote work. It's a wink and a nod, and so I can't imagine what health reform will look like under a President Romney. But I'm already very much not impressed.
Gotcha. I have heard that there were some Republicans and conservatives that said, Justice Chief Roberts upholding Obamacare in the form of a tax was a good thing. I really don't agree with that. I was just wondering if that was something that you agreed with or what your take was on that.
This idea that Roberts gave us something, kind of surreptitiously gave us something good in this wacky ruling just doesn't hold any water. I mean, you have to really hold your mouth just right, have all of your partisan hats on to even attempt to do that, because it really doesn't. If you go through it point by point at all, that line of rhetoric doesn't hold any water.
Yeah, well, it's like, okay, the good part is, could it be shut down by Congress because ultimately they hold the spending and ability to do that? Yes, I guess that's a good thing. But I'm not seeing a lot of examples where Congress has done that. And so what he did create was a completely new precedent for taxation of inactivity, which is, taxation is theft in the best of days, but taxation of inactivity is even, wow. I mean, it's it's a whole new level of debauchery that's come down from the federal government. So, yeah, I don't have any faith in that path either. If they start proving otherwise and they start showing us that they're actually serious about going the right direction on damn near anything, okay, maybe that becomes credible. But that requires politicians in D.C. to have spines they've proven no ability to have whatsoever under any issue, let alone one as controversial and as charged as this one. So I don't think we have any historical evidence that politicians are going to do something so bold as just, get rid of this thing when they have the opportunity. I think it's highly unlikely.
Now, unfortunately, there are other states in the union that do not have the ability to do ballot initiatives, such as Kentucky. I was just wondering if any of these states have contacted you for some guidance, or if you know of what some of the other states are attempting to do.
No, though I know that there's nobody's reached out proactively since this has occurred in Ohio, but I know that Maurice Thompson over at 1851 Center has certainly talked with people from different states who were involved in the efforts in the past. So Arizona had passed something similar. Oklahoma, Virginia had passed resolutions. A number of states, Missouri passed resolutions. We're kind of the highest hurdle, given that we were the only one by both citizens initiative and citizen vote to make this happen. But no, I would love to see other states do this. Almost half the states in the United States are capable of doing a citizens initiative. And if they aren't capable of doing citizens initiatives, certainly they can lobby and pressure their legislators to do this by the traditional lawmaking process, or a lot of states that don't have citizens initiative can have their legislatures place something before the electorate directly onto a ballot and allow them to vote on it. So they have three paths to accomplishing this goal, again, legislatively, legislature to ballot, and then citizens directly to ballot. And any state can do that. That's just a matter of, I think, people coming together, as a lot of us did in Ohio, and just wanting it to come forward, to take a stance against tyranny, to take a stance against the federal government and go, no, this is ridiculous. You can't push us around like this. And so it's a beginning. It's certainly not the end, and we're all well aware it's been going since 2010, so this will probably be a 4 to 5 year process for us. But if you don't get it started and you don't have it on the books, you don't have a foundation to build on. So I encourage anybody, happy to talk with anybody, but also please do it. I mean, every state should be working on these kinds of things.
So going back to Kentucky's issue with Obamacare, David, well, it does look like, and excuse my tone for sounding optimistic because this is not, there's no optimism when it comes to Obamacare, but it does look like that Kentucky is trying to be inclusive and transparent by having these exchange advisory board meetings. But when you kind of read between the lines, it appears that, it really doesn't include the citizens of Kentucky. Is this something that you would agree with?
Well, I would agree that the meetings have no purpose for the citizens of Kentucky, yes. Other than, we used them for their very first meeting. I caught wind that they were having a quote-unquote public meeting that they weren't really going to tell anybody about, and showed up there with about 150 of my closest friends on a Monday afternoon and just blew the doors off the meeting. All we did is stand up there and ask very basic questions that the top state officials who are running the health insurance exchange couldn't begin to answer it. I mean, just stammered around and looked really silly, and it was a lot of fun. We have another opportunity to do that here on the 25th of this month, and so we're going to go to Frankfurt. We'll take a few dozen people up there. I suspect in the crowd may be a little bit bigger because we're close to election time and people are a little excited and feel like we've got a little bit of wind at our backs. But yeah, it has been the dumbest process, and the pretense of transparency has been just embarrassing in the way that they have rammed this down our throats. Just a very, very horrible thing that Kentucky's going to pay dearly for.
Gotcha. So, Chris, let's fast forward to a perfect world 5 years from now, and Ohio essentially has killed Obamacare for its state. That the battle was fully won, or will there be entities that will constantly try and undermine it, and this will be more of a maintaining issue?
Oh, I think that it's far from done. I think that, I mean, we see that with every other facet of legislation in life. Just because something is made into a law, and even and especially if it's a law that you and I would appreciate, which is a law that, you know, protects liberty and property and takes away from nobody else, that sort of truly appropriate, you know, role of law, even when it meets that criteria, somebody's still going to come after it. Somebody's still going to challenge it. Somebody's going to try and bend the rules. And so one of the other things that any state would have to do, and certainly we're going to have to do, is police it. And I mean that in the best terms from our perspective, not state-based police, but us, personal, right. Citizen watch. And then I know Maurice, you know, as the attorney who took point on this, knew that all along, that you could see it happen within the next few years, that we know the state's going to push that edge, and then somebody's going to bring something to a challenge before even the Ohio Supreme Court, let alone the U.S. Supreme Court, is challenging the language or provision. And so it was left in a way that it was very flexible with regards to the definition of healthcare mandates. If it's touching healthcare, it's requiring a mandate of any kind, it should fall under this bill. So we wanted to provide a blanket of protection that covered a great number of things. But yeah, fully expect that to happen. I think that's inevitable, just like, again, every other good or bad law in Ohio or the country's history. Yeah, it's the beginning of something, unfortunately.
Now, David, back to you. If Ronnie isn't going to get rid or kill, which you say Obamacare, I guess the only other way is to stop the funding on a federal level, which would mean that you'd need more Republicans, for better or for worse, in the House and the Senate. Obamacare already kind of forces people and businesses to either dump certain insurances or just live off the government dole. So it kind of is putting citizens in a difficult position. But do you ever see a possibility of Obamacare possibly no longer being funded?
I think that the possibility of that is diminishing very, very rapidly. That we may well come to the point that we have so totally screwed up the infrastructure of our healthcare system that it'll be like when push came to shove on increasing the debt limit, that it just, you know, they just absolutely really, you know, couldn't do otherwise, because the money was already gone. It was just a matter of defaulting or not defaulting. We've effectively done that with our healthcare system, and you see that manifested primarily in the form of this rapidly accelerating the consolidation of providers. Very difficult anymore to find an independent practitioner in a lot of disciplines. They all are hospital employees, and as more of our providers wind up billing through the hospitals, those costs are going to go up exorbitantly, and then they all become locked into the hospital's rules, and it really changes things fundamentally in such a way that we're going to have a real tough time unwinding that. So the real opportunity exists, in my mind, on the state level. The thing that the big things that the states can do now, and more than a dozen of them have done it so far, is to one, refuse to do a state-run exchange. That's half of the battle. Refusing to expand Medicaid is the other half of the battle. Any state that has accomplished those two things really doesn't have much to worry about from Obamacare. In terms of the very worst of it, they're not going to get the brunt of it. The challenge for them becomes finding some way to foster free market mechanism for health care coverage, and that's really where my focus is. Even though here in Kentucky we're going head first into the exchange fiasco, and I'd say it's a 50-50 shot right at this point whether we will expand Medicaid or not. One point not to be missed on the expansion of Medicaid, they say, well, the federal government's going to pick up the costs on that for the first 3 years. That's absolutely not true. There will be a lot of people thrown into Medicaid with the expansion that do not fall under that. There's the difference between people who are eligible for it now and aren't in it, and people who will become newly eligible. The newly eligibles get 100% subsidy for 3 years from the federal government. The old the new people that were previously eligible will not. At states like Kentucky, they're already way underwater, and our Medicaid funding are just going to get crushed by that.
Well, gentlemen, I definitely want to thank you for your time today. Are there any resources that you would like to provide for us?
Yes, kyprogress.com, and my contact information is at the top. So anybody wants to reach out to me directly, just give me a shout.
Well, once again, I'd like to thank both of you for your time today.
Thank you, Jim.